Today's video, as you can tell from the title, whatever that is, today's video is going to be a little bit different. I knew I wanted to do this sometime in my channel whenever I could work in it, when life lets me. And I just want to do a disclaimer: if you see my outfit changes or my appearance or looks, I'm going to try to film this as much as I can tonight, but it might be like over several days. Because I do work tomorrow, I do have children, I do have other things outside of YouTube, which is shocking, I know. But I was inspired by my love of crime, criminal, horror, anything, and I don't mean that in a creepy way. I do not worship these people that commit these things or the things portrayed in movies or documentaries. Sorry, I forgot how to speak for a second. I just am intrigued by it. I was actually inspired by Black Cherry Heart. If you don't subscribe to her on here, go check out her channel. I first became aware of her on TikTok. I follow her on there, and I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna give my little spin on this because I've watched so many documentaries in my 25 years of life, a lot. I've watched a lot of horror movies, all of the above. I get it from my mom. I was watching this stuff at a young age. Don't recommend this to others or your children. I'm fine. It didn't affect me in my younger years, and it just kind of carried on. And it's a thing me and my mom bond on together a lot. So let's dive into this. Anyways, we are going to talk about the unfortunate double homicide, and I say double homicide, of Laci and Connor Peterson by the alleged Scott Peterson, which is her husband and Connor's father. I say allegedly because there's just a lot of unanswered questions. If you have time, there's actually a 6-part small documentary. I don't know why I can't say that word tonight, but I can't. Documentary on Hulu titled The Murder of Laci Peterson. I watched it the past 2 days because I just didn't have 6 hours in one day to sit down and watch it. So I watched some the other night, and then I kind of finished it up today because I was off, and my kids were watching, what were they watching? I'm so spaced out. Bubble Guppies. My kids are watching Bubble Guppies, and then they watch Umizoomi. And I just can't watch those two. I normally like all kid shows, but I pulled my laptop out and had my headphones in, and I was watching that. So I felt inspired, and I did a little bit more research. I remember hearing about this case. I was still kind of younger when it originally happened. Laci, fun fact, is actually only 3 months older than my mom. So when I started researching this after I finished watching the documentary, it kind of I was like, wow, she's the same age as my mom, only a few months older. Connor would only have been a couple of years younger than me, a little bit, almost actually 10 years, so I guess a little bit more. I forget I'm a little bit older. I was born in 94. Laci was due the early of 2003. I'm sorry. She was said to have been killed Christmas Eve of 2002, and then she was due a little bit after, in the very beginning of 2003. Unfortunately, neither her or Connor made it to her due date, and she was not found, and Connor was not found till after her due date in April of 2003. While I was watching the series, there was just, and I remember hearing about it, the news had touched upon it, how Scott is doing in prison, and he's in San Quentin, and he's supposed to die from lethal injection at a date, and you normally don't know that date. It's normally several years. They just spend time on death row because they try to appeal it often and basically prove that they're innocent or something was not, they weren't represented right, or the evidence wasn't offered in a just way. So he's actually still on death row, and it's 2019, so that tells you how long it can take. So I remember hearing about it in the past. I was still young. I was like 9 when this happened. And then I saw the series on Hulu because I just, like, my mind gravitates towards this stuff and horror stuff. I don't know. It's my interest. Some people like watching the news, which I do, kind of. And, like, reality TV, I like watching this. So I clicked on it and I started watching it, and instantly they showed some footage that has not been shown, like, in other documentaries and on TV. And some things just didn't add up to me. So I will walk you through the timeline. And if I have some things incorrect, please correct me in the comments below. I'm truly sorry, and I want to be respectful. I'm not a lawyer. I am not an attorney, whatever, a judge. I do not work in the criminal or law enforcement. This is just me, a crime junkie expressing and making a YouTube video and being inspired by other YouTubers and TikTokers just to discuss it, make a debate, and see what everybody else thinks and what I think. I just have to throw that disclaimer in because there's going to be somebody that watches this and comments and said, that's not true, that's not what happened. That's why it's a debate and a discussion, and me expressing my voice and the way that I want to. December 24th, 2002, Christmas Eve, Scott Peterson decides to take his boat out and go fishing for a few hours. It's pretty cold outside. His wife is 8.5 months pregnant. So right off the bat, me being a mother of 2 boys and just thinking about how my husband would have dealt with this, that was a little odd, because during that end of pregnancy, you could go into labor anytime. You could go into labor anytime at all during your pregnancy. But her being 8.5 months pregnant, I can't imagine myself deciding to go fishing all day. And they lived about an hour away from where he was fishing. So an hour to get there, an hour back. And I'm just rough estimating this. He went to the San Francisco Bay. And they live in Modesto, California. So, if she were to go into labor or something happened or there was a burglary in the house across from their house, scenarios, it would take a while to get back to her. And I'm sorry, not all women can drive themselves to the hospital. I know I couldn't. So right there, that was my first red flag. But there's men out there, they don't think that way. They don't think how I would or how my husband would. He watched me like a hawk, but he's also in the medical field, so it's a little bit different perspectives. That was my first red flag watching this and reading about this. That's the first timeline. That's Scott. I have not talked about Laci yet. That's Scott. He is off Christmas Eve. Wife is 8.5 months pregnant, fishing, leisurely, doing what he pleases. Now let's go to Laci. Okay. Scott, that's a little odd. It's not out of the ordinary. Some men do just go and fish and they don't think about certain things. So we can't automatically rule him a killer. I know some of you are like, what? Laci is seen, they owned a golden retriever named Mackenzie. She was seen by several witnesses walking their dog, and she was not wearing a jacket. She just had a shirt and like some leggings or like light pants. You know, things that are comfortable to an 8.5 month pregnant woman. Even though it was cold outside, she didn't have a jacket. So that was a little odd to some of the witnesses, and they did make that in their report. and they thought it was kind of odd. She was really struggling with the dog. The dog was kind of pulling her, but she was trying to take him on a walk, and like 3 or 4 witnesses saw her. So that is also kind of a red flag, because at the end of it, the theory is that Scott loaded her into his truck, took her to the San Francisco Bay, and dumped her body where she's finally found, and baby Connor, during his fishing escapade. But then also these witnesses saw her at this time walking their golden retriever. So that's kind of where, for me personally, it was like, how can she be 2 places at once? Or what if those 2 scenarios did happen, but not at the time it's being said that it did? So things to think about. And these are things that just automatically came to my mind while I was watching this documentary, this mini series, I should say, because it's 6 different parts and 6 different points of views, and there's a lot of different, there's the jurors and the reporters and the families from both sides discussing in them, so there's a lot of different perspectives and opinions. Now, Scott is gone basically all day from early in the morning. He was supposed to go golfing with a friend, but it was a little too chilly outside is what he said. But it's not cold enough to go out on a boat and go fast, because he did admit to opening up his engine, which basically means he went as fast as his boat would go through the bay, which would be pretty chilly if it was already cold outside and then the water and air just hitting your face. So that was another thing that I was kind of questioning. So he was gone from the early morning. He went to his warehouse where also he works from to pick his boat, drove the hour, spent several hours there, then drove the hour back, put the boat back, then went back to their home where he noticed Laci was not home. He called his in-laws and asked if she was there, because she often went over to her mother's. They were pretty close. She wasn't there. So then his father-in-law reported to the police that she was missing, not Scott. Another red flag. Because I was trying to put myself in his shoes. If I come home from all day being gone and my 8.5-month pregnant wife was not home and her parents had no idea her vehicle was still there, I would be frantic and panicking, and I would have automatically called the police after I spoke to my in-laws, which he did not. Another tidbit I should add. During the alleged walk, which the witnesses did see her, so I have to, in my mind, say that she did take their dog for a walk, Laci goes missing, because the dog is seen wandering around the neighborhood, and thankfully the neighbor that lives right next door takes their golden retriever and just places him into the backyard and closes the gate. She thought it was odd, but didn't really think of it at the time, which, you know, dogs get out and stuff. But he still had the leash on his collar, so it was a little alarming, but she still had other things to do, so she just placed him in the backyard and left. So that makes you wonder, was she abducted? Did she actually go for the walk? Did Scott, kind of jump her from behind, toss her in the truck in the garage or something? Or did the burglar across the street, did burglars really get her like some people say? These are questions that I wondered and a lot of people wonder. But it's like the only person that's going to really know is whoever did this to Laci and Connor. So it's just, we can't say. This search goes on for days and weeks and months, and there is no signs, there is no evidence, there is no blood, there is no murder weapon. They do find some handmade anchors that Scott had made that were suspicious, but that is really all that they found. The house was spotless, which is, not too unusual. People keep their house clean. He was a little concerned with the detectives and stuff making the house dirty, which again isn't that weird, but when your wife is missing, that's kind of would be the last thing on your mind. So really, there was nothing to go on. Normally in these situations, there's a knife or a gun that's in plain sight. There's blood or some kind of struggle. Besides the dog being found on his leash, there was really nothing pointing to Scott or anybody else for that fact, other than a burglary happening across the street. But even then, there weren't any witnesses that saw anybody abduct her. There wasn't a sign of a struggle other than, things that had happened to the house. There was no indication of Laci or Connor. So it was just kind of like, we don't know who did it, but we have this husband here that kind of looks suspicious. So let's kind of just go after it and let's hit him with everything we have. And basically watching the documentary, that is what they did. The biggest and flashiest red flag that I had experienced watching this and researching some of it, 1 month prior to Laci and Connor, and I want to make sure that I mention Connor as much as I can during this, because she was pregnant, there was a child. He was basically full term, but he was almost born into this world. And a lot of times when I was researching this particular story, Laci was only mentioned and Connor wasn't mentioned as much. So remember, it's Laci and Connor. Anyways, the biggest, flashiest, in-my-face red flag was 1 month prior to Laci and Connor going missing. Scott had a girlfriend, an affair, if you will. It was an affair, what have you, with an Amber. She was a massage therapist, blonde, typical. It's the typical mistress that the media loves to portray, and I'm not stereotyping. It's just, I'm blind, okay? It's just, this was a saving grace for the prosecutors, because they were looking for any and everything to nail this guy, which it's pretty disgusting that this happened, but it didn't bring a lot of evidence or anything that connected him to murdering Laci, other than him being a sleazeball. So 1 month prior to Laci and Connor going missing, Scott meets Amber, and they kind of casually date. They only saw each other a few times. He did accompany her to her work Christmas party, and they showed pictures during the trial and the documentary. It looked pretty bad, because you're thinking this entire time his wife was at home, heavily pregnant, probably wondering where he is, concerned, emotional, just experiencing a lot of stuff. And here he is out at a Christmas party, and they admitted to staying overnight in a hotel. So he was gone an entire night without Laci, and she was at home pregnant with their son, unborn child. So it didn't look good. It didn't look good for him, and he was interviewed the first night, and he was asked if they had any marital problems. He said, absolutely not. We love each other. Like, they always say this, so that wasn't unusual. But then when they brought this Amber girl in and they started showing her footage, which I genuinely felt bad for her, because she did have a daughter. She was a single mom. She was just trying to make ends meet, basically. She did not know Scott was married. Scott had told her that his wife had passed away, and this was going to be the first holiday he would celebrate without her, a month before she went missing. So that's a little suspicious. So I felt for this Amber girl, because she didn't know. She really thought, hey, I've met a great guy. And during the beginning days of the search for Laci and Connor, he was telling her that he was on a European trip, going to Paris and Brussels and just all kinds of places, even while he was at a candlelight vigil for his wife and child. He called her and said, hey, I'm celebrating the new year. It's already New Year here. And the whole time they're there's cameramen recording him, and that you can hear people in the background, and Amber thinks it's him celebrating the new year, even though detectives had got to her and she had given her statement, and all of this was recorded on a device. And it's just sickening to think that even if this guy didn't do this, how at this time could you sit there and be talking to another woman, act casual, and have no like remorse or concern that your wife and your unborn child is still missing? And at this point, it's been several days, and it gets into the weeks and months, and they're still not. So you obviously start to think they're not coming back. Now, the documentary spends a lot of time on Amber, a lot of wasted time in the trial, because obviously this woman had no idea, and I genuinely think she had no idea. She had no connection. She helped them as much as she could. She wore a wire and recorded her phone conversations, and she did everything she could to get him to admit. And he did come clean about everything going on in the news, and that he wasn't in Europe, obviously, but he never admitted to doing anything. So that's when I was like, maybe this guy didn't really do this. Maybe he's just an idiot. He's just a man that doesn't know what to do, didn't know what he wanted, obviously didn't want children. He kind of wanted to be a bachelor. But I was like, maybe this guy didn't. But that's all the prosecutors and the jurors could really hang on to. It was more like they didn't care who killed Laci and Connor. They just cared that Scott had this mistress and was doing all this and going to Christmas parties and spending it in hotel rooms and blah, 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 portraying that he was in Europe. And like in my mind the whole time I was like, are y'all gonna talk about Laci? Are you gonna talk about Connor? Are you gonna start looking at other avenues, other directions? Are you just gonna keep talking about this mistress? Because obviously this is not the evidence and this is not the direction to take you into. And that's honestly how I felt watching this documentary and watching some of the trial, because it includes some of the trial. And I did research a little bit, and they talk a lot about this one aspect. And yeah, it bothered me. That's kind of disturbing that somebody can do that. But there's a lot of people that cheat on their pregnant wives or are pregnant themselves and cheat on their spouses. But the bigger picture here is a woman was murdered and her unborn child, and we need to get back to that. And it took a while for this documentary and the trial itself to get to that point. And I honestly don't think it ever did. Another big thing. So on April 13th, 2003, the body of Connor was discovered by a couple walking their dog down by the San Francisco Bay. It was not a lake. I know a lot of the stuff I looked up and other people that have discussed it kept saying a lake for some reason. It's the San Francisco Bay. And for reference, Scott and Laci, like I said before, are from Modesto, so it's about an hour away from where they live. Discovered the decomposed body of baby Connor. And then a week later, a little bit down from where Connor was found, Laci's body was finally found. And I know that sounds good, but it is good for the family to have closure, but it's not like the family can finally be like, wow, I feel so much better. They don't feel better. Their daughter still died, and their grandson still died, in a very gruesome and unfortunate situation. But that is the timeline. That is when they finally were found. They went missing in December, and they weren't found till April. So they were heavily decomposed. Environmental and animals had kind of gotten to them a little bit. And there were some suspicious things that had happened to the body. And not all information has still been leaked, or I just can't find it. But the judge and other people wanted some of the autopsy and the coroner's report to be disclosed, which that's respectful. I'm not going to try to pry my way and find stuff, but I did find a few things. So, viewer discretion advised. I'm not going to show anything, but I'm just going to discuss upon a few things that was released to the press and public and things I found during my research. Just want to put a disclaimer. You should stop now. For those of you still watching, a few things that I found a little disturbing when I researched the autopsy report for both Connor and Laci. I have a lot of questions because some things didn't add up. If Laci was abducted by these burglars, because there was a burglary that happened across the street and her mom said that she's the type of person, if she saw this happening while she was walking her dog, she would have walked over there and said something or tried to stop them. There's just no witnesses that they saw her walking the dog. They never saw the burglary happening or her barging in. There was a story surfacing around that this did happen, but they later debunked it, and it was just somebody falsifying evidence, basically. But the thing that kind of bothered me is, remember back when I said Scott had a few handmade anchors in his storage area at his job where he kept his boat? Laci's body, and I want to do a disclaimer again, if you're squeamish or don't like hearing about these things, please stop now. Laci's head was decapitated. That they couldn't fully say what her cause of death was because she had several limbs missing and just how badly decomposed and other elements had gotten to her. But they do believe she was decapitated, and they're kind of leaning on that being her cause of death. Her left and right foot, and I believe the left leg down from the calf down, were cut off. Her arms were cut off, so basically she was a torso and part of her lower body. And this is the even more disturbing thing. And it never really says, or maybe I just couldn't find it, so if anybody knows, correct me. I believe Connor was cut from her body because he was also basically killed, even though he may not have survived after being cut open, just because he was only 8.5 months, which is still viable. But like I said, we're not the person that was there actually doing this, so we don't know. But he was, I believe, cut from the body, unless she delivered him, and that set Scott into a rage because he wasn't ready for a child or didn't want a child. Either way, Connor was outside of Laci's body, and twine or tape, they aren't sure because it was kind of damaged from the decomposition and just the time, was wrapped twice around Connor's neck, and essentially they believed he was suffocated. And there was also a pretty significant, large, what have you, slash mark to his body as well. They're not sure what made it, or if it could have just been, a boat passing by. I hate to even say that, the thought of it gets my heart. They're not sure if, an outside element or whoever did the crime did this, but that is what I could find that happened to both Laci and Connor. So that kind of gave me questions, because if this was a burglary, if they just wanted to get rid of Laci, I would assume they would just dump her body. Why either cut or deliver Connor and then kill him also when he's already in the womb? Essentially, when the mother dies, the baby does die because there's no oxygen, no blood flow getting to the baby. So that was kind of a question I had watching it. It didn't really talk about it in the documentary, so I did research, and this was what I could find because some of it was disclosed. So, just something to make you think, and it wasn't talked about in the trial, really. Like I said, it was this mistress and Scott, and he's awful, blah, 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 and I'm like, if you want to get this guy, look at this evidence in front of you. The body is finally found. Connor's body's finally found, and there's some strange things that happened that we don't know why. Another thing I want to discuss, and I'm going to stop, so maybe I'll finish all of this in one take. The jurors that they picked for Scott Peterson's trial for Laci and Connor, essentially. Now, when they pick jurors, they basically have to take what is coming towards them, all the evidence, all the case files, all the footage, the audio. They have to look at it with their mind and not their heart, because you can't be biased, you can't use your emotions, and 100%, these jurors thought with their heart and not their mind. And I get where they're coming from. This guy had some questionable life choices and actions. But then you also have to think about, this is a mother and her child that were murdered. Wouldn't you want to find who actually did it? Or if he did it, convict him for the right reasons, not because he had a mistress and went fishing and left his pregnant wife at home, and then she went missing and he wasn't really concerned and was still more concerned with the mistress. And like, even the way they talked about Scott in interviews and press releases, very vulgar. It wasn't professional at all. They were actually caught discussing the trial at a bar. The bartender did have to go on record, and he pleaded the fifth, and it was a whole ordeal. And they were basically saying they just wanted to slam this guy. They wanted him to fry, which makes no sense because the state of California does not have the electric chair. They do lethal injection now. Not a lot of places use the electric chair anymore, if at all. You don't hear about it very much anymore. And it was just like, even while I was watching it, I was like, they don't care about Connor. They don't care about Laci. They just want to put this guy in jail. And it was very disheartening to watch because, and I know if I was a juror on this case or any case, I would be emotional. But I would have to set my emotions aside, so I'm not being biased. I'm not using my emotions, so I can process the evidence coming towards me, and they did not. So that's just my take on it. And even now, after watching it, I don't have a definite. Normally when I watch these things, I'm like 100% they did it, or 100% they didn't do it, or look at all this evidence, or they don't. This case, there's not much evidence, not many witnesses. The witnesses they just saw her walking their dog, and one witness saw Scott at the bay on his boat, but I mean, they didn't see Laci, they didn't see a body, they didn't see him do anything suspicious. There's no murder weapon besides them finding some homemade anchors. He did try to run when they put the warrant out for his arrest. He dyed his hair blonde. He had $15,000 in cash. He had Viagra, which is kind of, that's questionable. So it does make me lean more toward it, but where's the evidence? You know, why hasn't he come clean? He hasn't even said anything about it. Not anything. And in his interview, he hasn't slipped up. He hasn't said anything other than him being kind of a jerk. He kind of is. But it's just, take it as you will. This is one case where I'm like, is this a case of a husband that was not ready for a child, did not want to be married anymore, decided he wanted to change, had a girlfriend, and just decided to kill his wife? Or is this a case of an abduction of a mentally unstable person that decided to kidnap her and murder her and then kill Connor? I don't know. I would love to know what you guys think or anyone else thinks. Scott Peterson was convicted. He is still on death row, like I said. Eventually, sometime, if there is an appeal or something brought to the courts, judges, attorneys, whatever attention, he will die by lethal injection whenever they schedule the date. So that's another thing to think about. These jurors, these people, they very well could have just given an innocent man his death. And there could be somebody out there, or people, I don't want to say one person, we don't know. The only person that knows is Laci. And unfortunately, she is not here today to tell us. And Connor is not here today to live his life as a now, 15-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old teenager enjoying high school and, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And yeah, this was interesting to research, and it was interesting to watch the series and all the other footage that I could find. And it's just one case that I knew I wanted to come on here and talk about, because it just really left me puzzled, and I'm still puzzled, and I'll honestly go to bed thinking about it. And my heart goes to Laci Peterson's family and Scott Peterson's family, because whether people like to admit this or not, when stuff like this happens, even though they are alleged murderers, even when they're not, their family is suffering too, because they've lost a loved one too, and they have to live with this now. So, yes. My thoughts, reflection on this case, I hope I had everything accurate and it was respectful and tasteful, and, because I watched a couple on here and they had a lot of their information wrong, and it was just, I don't know. I felt inspired. So I would love to see some comments and discussion below about this, what you think there's you have, really anything, because I can't even give a theory, because there's so many different things. And it's just the unknown. This is really an unsolved case, in my opinion. But until next time, stay hippie and sleep well tonight. Hopefully I didn't give you the chills.